Welcome to Free Talk Cast, where we talk about news and current events from a perspective of peace, love, and liberty. I'm, of course, Aria, and I'm joined this week by
Nikki.
And it's been a weird week for episodes. I recorded one with Richie Rich Monday night, and due to the backdrop that I had playing, which was a video, it was producing audio the entire time, and there was no indication that this was happening. Like, there was nothing in my headphones, so all of that audio has this weird Russian opera going on behind it.
That's awful.
Yeah, it's not good. So that episode, I'm probably going to throw it up at some point and call it like the best episode ever, because you can hear.
So is it too loud? Because it would be funny if it was just playing like background music and you guys could still talk and hear your conversation, but it's just this weird Russian opera in the background. That would be funny.
Unfortunately, it's way too loud.
Yeah, that sucks.
You can hear Richie Rich and I talking, but that's it. You can't make out anything that we're saying. So that's lost episode, and I'm probably going to throw it online just sort of as a joke, really.
Yeah.
Call it the best episode ever. And the joke is that, you can't hear anything we're freaking saying.
Yeah.
So I ended up putting something together and just throwing it online quickly, giving people updates on what's going on with Ian Freeman and
that's great.
his appeal that's coming up next month. There's a hearing
February,
in Boston.
Yeah.
So I'm going to that. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. Hoping good things will come of it, but not really expecting good things to come of it. His attorney is expecting this to have to go to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So if anyone's wondering how this hearing is likely to go, his attorney is expecting it to go to the Supreme Court. So I would not expect Ian to win his appeal at this particular level.
But that's good though, right? In certain ways?
I don't know.
if for activism purposes.
Yes. I mean, if we have a Supreme Court ruling and Ian wins at the Supreme Court level, and we have this ruling that says that FinCEN was not authorized from 2001 to 2021 to regulate cryptocurrency, because it was in 2021 that they added new language to the statute which allowed cryptocurrency to be included within it. But prior to that, that language wasn't there. That precedent, or that Supreme Court ruling, would be tremendous for everyone who had been charged with operating an unlicensed money transmitting business from 2007-ish to 2021.
Well, it's crazy to like backdate the law.
That's
to make a law and then be like, oh, well, I know you were doing this thing before this was in the law or against the law or whatever language you want to use. I know it was technically legal when you were doing it, but now it's illegal, or now we're regulating it. And to backdate that just seems so obviously, blatantly unjust.
Well, they're arguing that they're not doing that. Now, Congress did add language in 2020 that went into effect in 2021 to this law, and I don't remember the exact statute. This was 3 years ago that I was going through all of this. But in 2021, they did add language that included something to the effect of, or some intermediary that functions as funds, something like that.
Oh, okay. So
basically creating an umbrella term that would include cryptocurrency within it. But the fact that Congress added that language to the statute is ipso facto proof that it needed to be added, because cryptocurrency was not included in the statute as it existed prior to 2021.
Yeah.
And the Bitcoin transactions that I did all took place prior to 2021.
Yeah, of course.
Now, there was one that took place in 2021, but you have 6 months from the point that you become required to license yourself with FinCEN. You have 6 months to actually license yourself.
Oh, so it's still technically
Yes.
in that.
So
okay.
if Ian wins his appeal, nothing he or I did would have run afoul of this particular statute.
And how would that affect you?
There's only 3 bases upon which I can appeal my conviction, because I took a plea deal. But one of those is a Supreme Court ruling saying that that it was unconstitutional for me to be prosecuted for this.
And would that like make you not a felon?
Yes.
Cool.
Ian winning his appeal.
They can't undo your prison sentence,
They
which
can't.
is really fucked up.
But it would be nice to be able to, carry a gun again. Like
Absolutely,
someone allegedly
yeah.
tried breaking into my house a few weeks ago. It would be
Yeah.
nice to have a gun instead of, a golf club with which to defend myself. So
It's so I mean, we already know this, but it's so horrible that something being a felony and being convicted of as a felon takes away so many of your rights.
It's absolutely crazy.
I mean, that's like the whole big to me, being a felon isn't a big deal, but the legal implications of that,
right.
That's the big deal.
It's very frustrating, and it affects me for the rest of my life.
Absolutely, yeah.
I do plan, regardless of what's going on with Ian's appeal, I do plan to file a motion for restoration of rights after I finished my sentence, because I am still currently serving my sentence.
Yeah.
I'm still under supervised release. I plan to file a motion for restoration of rights under the auspices that, I was a nonviolent offender. My charge was not having a business license.
Yeah.
And for that, I lost the right to carry firearms for the rest of my life.
It's insane.
Yeah, that is completely insane and disproportionate.
Most felons are nonviolent, I would assume. I actually don't know that.
So. I suspect
for
most
100%.
are drug offenders.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know that for 100% fact, but I would assume. I mean, most people in jail are nonviolent. Or they're convicted. I mean, they might be violent, but what they're convicted of is a nonviolent crime.
Right. So.
Or a victimless crime.
All of that's going to happen in the future. There are a lot of people in federal prison for victimless crimes. But none of that is really what we sat down to talk about today. We mentioned this a few weeks ago, this birth certificate concept and the idea of not getting birth certificates for people. And this is something like Social Security cards in particular is an interest for me because of the Social Security statute came into effect in, I think, 1914.
Yeah,
whereas the Federal Reserve Act was put into place in 1913. And whether it was intentional or not, the fact is that the U.S. government, through the Social Security Act and through the income tax, put the average, that's right, the Social Security thing wasn't until the 40s or the 50s maybe, but regardless, the average American was put up as collateral for the federal government's loans from the Federal Reserve Bank. And that's horrific. They were like, look, we can tax we have this 300 million population farm of slaves, and I hate to use the word slaves, but this is the government we're talking about, and whether we are slaves or not, that is how they view us. We're cattle. We have all of these cattle that we can tax for their wealth, and therefore we can pay you back any amount of money that you loan us. And
look, at the very least, collateral.
Yeah, and we wrote into law that we can take this money, and they're okay with it. But that's the Social Security aspect of it, and I'm curious how Christians feel about this. I know they're adapted to it at this point, and to them it's just normal, but this is your government giving you a registration number that identifies you at all times in every circumstance.
From a religion or a Christianity standpoint, or just whatever, from a faith standpoint, I think anyone who has real faith and trust in any God or any source, supreme being, whatever, I think it's kind of contradictory to not be an anarchist. Because how are these people going to put the government, how are they going to worship the government when they should be worshiping God above all else? But it's clear to many people, to many Christians and people of other faiths, their faith and their worship in the government comes first. And of course they don't see it that way, but it is quite obvious that it's that way. When churches were shut down during COVID and people were just accepting it, that's fine, we'll just do it on Zoom. And yes, some churches and some religions were like, hell no. We're going, this is our place of worship. I attended
a church service during the COVID-19 lockdowns.
Yeah. And I think it's crazy fear is one thing if you're afraid of getting sick or whatever, but it was so obviously government overreach. And also, we're getting off topic, but for someone to have a real and true deep trust and faith in God, you should. I'm surprised that a lot of these people don't actually have trust in God's plan. When I go forward, I'm not a Christian, but I do have a very deep trust in God, source, whatever you want to call it, the universe. When I go forth in my day-to-day life, I am not afraid of getting sick or whatever because I have that deep trust in God's plan. And I am not afraid. And it brings me so much peace in my own heart. So it does seem to be a little hypocritical that a lot of Christians, talking about COVID, didn't seem to have that like actual trust in God's plan. You know, and of course we see this all the time where they like don't actually live by the Bible and you know, all this stuff, all of this like, you know, like lukewarm Christianity or
One of the most interesting examples to me is the fact that they are sad when people die. And for a Christian, your belief is that this person is going to be with God and going to eternal paradise. And I don't understand how you could be sad about that, or how you could even want to, if you truly believe that this life is like a test run and eternal paradise awaits you, wouldn't you want to get this life over as soon as possible? Because the longer you're here, the greater your chances of fucking it up.
Well, I mean, not necessarily, because I do believe part of the plan, and I don't know if Christians believe this or not, but life is for learning, and God put us here for a reason. But I do agree with you where if someone, if their path is to die, or to die sooner than we think they should, I mean, they're going to eternal paradise by their beliefs. So yeah, why would you be sad or try to prevent that? And I don't think you should be, I don't think they would necessarily believe in being reckless. Like, I don't think that would necessarily be like the alternative or the, whatever, the thing that they should do per the word of the Bible. But it does seem to like preserve life in this artificial and forceful way does seem very contradictory to what the Bible teaches.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a minute ago that the state is a religion. And this is something that I firmly believe, having evaluated this for the better part of my adult life. And it's something that a lot of people struggle to face, but I've seen it. And the fact is that this thing called the state, or what most people would call the government, but really it's the state, but it's not worth getting into the distinction between those two concepts right now.
Yeah.
It creates this feeling of awe for people, this thing that's greater than themselves, that is more powerful, virtually all powerful.
It's like a savior too, right?
Yes. The vast majority of Americans are waiting around for the government to save them somehow, to save the economy, to protect their jobs, to give them health insurance, to take care of them, to do all of the things that you would expect a God to do, to provide for them.
Or a parent.
And meanwhile, I watched a clip a few years ago of the electors carrying the elector votes into the congressional halls or whatever, and it was so obviously a religious service. The gravity with which these maidens, they were maidens, and they were dressed as maidens with the robes and all of that crazy shit going on, and they were carrying what could very well have been the Ark of the Covenant into the great halls of the religious building. And there was just this great air of pomposity about it, where like, this is this great, wondrous, behold the majesty of democratic government.
Yeah.
That kind of attitude going on, to say nothing of the fact that I've been to court on many levels, including federal court. And when you go in, you should be immediately stricken by the similarities between this room and a church.
The pews?
There's
I mean, that's just one thing that's blatantly obvious, but there's
emblems on the wall.
Yes, so much symbolism.
Yes, there's
so much symbolism.
And it's nice, it's ornate, it's meant to look awe-inspiring and impressive. There's symbols that are meaningful everywhere. And then there's this man in a robe who's the all-powerful, who tells you to rise upon entering. And I don't know if every church
he looks like a priest to me.
He does. And
dressed like a priest, acting like a priest.
I don't know if every church does this whole please rise for the pastor thing, but the church that I grew up in absolutely did that. And every church that I visited in the South absolutely did that. When there was this like assistant pastor, I guess, who would come up and lead the singing, and then please rise for the pastor. Everyone would stand. The pastor would come in and say, be seated, and everyone would sit back down. And that's the exact same process that happens in a courtroom.
Yeah.
And that's the reason that I refuse to stand for judges. And man, did this create some problems when I was facing a federal trial.
Yeah.
Because I never stood for the judge. My attorney did not want to fight this battle, and I totally get it. So we came up with a solution, and Ian's attorney came up with the same solution with him as well, which is that We're just going to already be standing when the judge comes in. That way we're not standing up for the judge. We're just, my attorney
You're
and I,
just standing
yes,
of your own volition.
Yes. My attorney and I were just standing there having a conversation, looking awkward. The only people in the whole room standing. Everyone's looking around going, why are these people still standing, right? And it was because, like, this judge was about to sentence me, and realistic, I don't want to piss off this person with the power to put me in prison for 37 months.
But also, fuck you, you're not my priest.
Right. So our solution was, and then, saying please be seated was fine or whatever. So we just, I don't mind someone telling me to have a seat. People do that all the time. Well, during Ian's trial, something similar happened where he didn't want to stand for the judge. And the solution that his attorney came up with was to point out to him, well, you're not standing for the judge. You're standing for the jury. And once the jury is actually present, that is what they say.
I don't know,
Ladies
fuck them
and
too.
gentlemen, please rise for the jury. And it's a sign of respect for these people taking time out of their days or whatever to
sentence him to prison?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, that didn't work out, obviously, but that was the argument his attorney used. And, that is the way it actually plays out, at least at the federal level, where they tell you to rise for the jury rather than the judge. But it's all a mess. And these things are important. And they're so subtle. That's what makes them so insidious. And we just accept them as normal. We don't think anything about them. And to circle back to what we were talking about at the beginning, one of the things that is just alarmingly common that we think nothing about is that everyone has a birth certificate and everyone has a social security card.
And so many people cannot fathom life without them. I have this conversation a lot with people, and it's a very controversial topic because so many people are so indoctrinated into the system that they think if my kid doesn't have a birth certificate and a social security number, they can't do anything. If I don't do this immediately, the second they're born or whatever, the week they're born, like run to the town hall and register my kid, the week they're born.
And that's exactly it. And it's worth just drawing a focus on that. What these people are doing is registering their child with the government like it's a car.
Like it's a fucking car. Yeah. And they can't fathom. They're like, well, if I don't do this, I am a bad parent and I will be setting my kid up for a life of difficulty and distress. But I'm here to say that that's actually not true. And I do have softness and compassion for parents who don't really know any better and they're just trying to do the best for their kid. Whatever. I recognize that it's the normal and easy thing to do if you're trying to participate in the system. So, but there are alternatives where you can still, your child can still get a passport. They can still get a driver's license. They can still get a bank account. They can still go to public school for whatever reason. If you would ever want to send your kid to public school,
please
they
don't.
They can go to college. You can pretty much do anything. You don't necessarily need a birth certificate to register your child to be a ward of the state. You don't need to do their documentation. You can do your own. I'm not recommending anything, right? You're all free people. Do whatever you want and what you think is best for your family. If you think it's best to get a birth certificate, then whatever, do it. But I personally don't think it's a great idea to do nothing. Sure. Because that will make your kid's life harder if they do want to participate in the system. So if you're just existing with no records of your birth, with no record of parentage, it is more difficult to then try to get a passport or get a bank account or a job or whatever in the future. Like if your kid turns 16 and they have no early records, it's a little bit more difficult. But
I'm a firm advocate in allowing people to make their own decisions. And this, sometimes frustrates people because I would apply this, to allowing, teenagers to transition as well. But what is the possibility of having a child, waiting until they're older, and then allowing them to make the decision about whether to get a birth certificate and all of that? Can all that be done retroactively?
Absolutely. And this is another common misconception where people think you have to do it now or soon or else you can never do it. And that's what I say. I'm not necessarily against my children having social security numbers. I mean, kind of I am, but I have one. My parents did the normal social security number, birth certificate thing with me, and I use my social security number. Like I put it down on, because I have it, whatever. I haven't revoked it or anything like that. I know people who have, and I think that's great as well if that's what you want to do. That's not something I chose to do. But you can always get one. Listen, the state, they want you to be in the system. They want you to be tax cattle.
That makes a lot of
They
sense.
want you to be a ward of the state. They want your children. You know what I mean? It's so there. It might be a little bit more difficult later on, but honestly, if you have some form of documentation, and that could be a baptism certificate, that could be early medical records, that could be any sort of early public records. So a birth announcement in the newspaper, that could be a notarized affidavit of birth.
Yeah, because just thinking about all of this, it would seem like the real hurdles that you would run into trying to get your child a Social Security card, like, let's assume that Jay Noon, who he's not been on Free Talk Cast before, but he's been on Free Talk Live, he's a great friend of the show, great friend of mine, does not have a Social Security number. Let's assume he got hit in the head and was like, I want a Social Security number. Now, if he just walked into the building and sat down and, said, I don't have a Social Security number and I want one, I suspect the hurdle there would be them wondering their curiosity or their inability to prove that he was, in fact, born in the United States and is an American citizen.
Yes, yeah, and that's they want to prove citizenship. It's a little bit easier for children, even if your kid's 16 or 18, because your parents can be there, they can be present, and if your parents are already in the system, so if they have a passport, driver's license, if they have a birth certificate or proof of birth and proof of citizenship, it really needs to be proof of citizenship. If your parents have that and they're with you and they're like, yep, this person is my kid and we have proof of that and they want to get a social security number, that's really all you need. It's a little bit more difficult if your parents can't be present and you're like a full-grown man. I'm sure that would be more difficult. But if you have a passport or something, I mean...
Yeah. Yeah, I could certainly see how all of this would work out. And at some point, it would seem that there would need to be some record of citizenship within their system, which is fine because you as the parent almost certainly already have that. You listener out there, you already have all of the proof that you are, in fact, an American citizen. So your great-great-great-grandchildren with their birth records and their newspaper announcements of birth and their baptismal records or whatever could still all get Social Security numbers just by pointing back to all of those documentations and the family tree. And because you mentioned at one point family Bibles, you mentioned this several episodes ago, so I'm going far on my memory here, that family Bibles, if they contained like the family tree or something, could be used as as proof for these documentation purposes. It's not as simple, or it's not as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not restricted to just, oh, this person was born in a hospital, here's your birth certificate, here's your Social Security number, go get a job and pay your taxes.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome thing. So what would someone do if they were pregnant and they were listening to this show and they were curious to learn more about this? Because like we're never going to be able to convey all of the facts and information here, but all we can do is like sort of lead people to the water and then ask them to drink. So where would you recommend people go to try to learn more about all of this and perhaps the pitfalls of having a birth certificate? Because speaking from personal experience, I can't think of any problems that having a birth certificate or Social Security card has ever really caused me in my life. And I suspect that's what a lot of people are going to think, that there's no reason not to because it's just, some documentation and it doesn't hurt them and it's probably not going to hurt their child.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it's more of a philosophical stance, and there are several, maybe you could call them conspiracy theories surrounding the birth certificate and the Social Security numbers. I mean, it's documented that like what these things are and what we've been discussing, like that a Social Security number like does make you tax cattle, and a birth certificate at the very least makes your child a ward of the state, makes it easier for CPS to take away your kids. So basically it's not always going to be an issue. And especially if you're a good muggle and you do what you're supposed to do, you take your kids to, like do the normal thing.
Get the vaccines, you put them in public school.
Yeah, don't piss off the state. Like, don't do anything out of line. You'll
But that
probably be fine.
That can include crazy things like smoking pot in the state of New Hampshire can result in CPS attempting to take your children away.
Literally in some states, it's not as bad in New Hampshire. But in Massachusetts, for example, all they have to do to remove your children from your home is have a suspicion or just have someone report. And it's not like somebody files a report on you and they're going to immediately take your kids. That doesn't always happen. I'm sure if the report was bad enough, and again, this could be lies, it doesn't have to be proven as true, they can take your children, at least in the state of Massachusetts, and I'm sure in other states, they can take your children before you are proven guilty and before, all they have to do is file a case on you and they can come take your kids. That is horrifying. As a parent, that is absolutely horrifying and terrifying, especially if you know anything about DCF or CPS, whatever. And
it's
the
foster
care,
trafficking.
In the foster care system. I know so many people who are foster kids, and most, maybe all of them, were abused in some way. Some of them were raped and molested. I mean, this is exactly what, as a parent, it is our duty to protect our children against. So, yeah, big rant for
all
that.
All really good points, though.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
And you mentioned
it's
the
horrible.
philosophical reasons for doing this, and I really think that that's important now that you've put it in those terms, because you as a pregnant person have to, I can't believe I said that. I'm so sorry. You as a pregnant woman have to.
I didn't even notice that.
I didn't mean to. I was thinking that
you as a birthing person.
I was thinking you as a father need to think about these things as well. But then I was like, well, really, it's the mother's decision because she's the one carrying the baby. So I was having all of these thoughts in my head as I was speaking, and I just ended up saying birthing person or whatever.
I would argue it's also the father's responsibility and right to have a say on these things. But you're correct, at least the way it is. And according to a lot of people's opinion, the mother has the ultimate say.
And as a pregnant woman, you should ask yourself whether you want your child to be free or to be registered with the government like an automobile.
Yeah.
Or like
I
a
also
dog.
don't.
I had to register my dog when I lived in the city of Keene.
Yeah. I also don't believe in that. I don't believe in registering animals or cars. I mean, I do. My cars are registered because I don't want to deal with it, but I think that's bullshit also.
I was getting letters from the Keene Police Department all the way up until I went to prison.
Threat, blackmail letters.
And this was,
if you don't register your dog, we're gonna call animal control on you.
And you may be curious, how did they even know that I had a dog? And this is an important concept because let's say you have a child, and not to say that children are dogs or dogs are children or any of that. I'm not a dog mom or any of that
whatever.
nonsense.
They're a dependent.
Right. Yeah. But how did the government become aware that I had an unlicensed dog in the first place? And how would
you didn't get her a birth certificate?
Right. How would the government become aware that you have an unlicensed child? And the fact that I can even say that is crazy. I had an unregistered dog. You can have an unregistered child. And when you put it in those terms, it really reveals how crazy it is. But it wasn't until I took this dog to get rabies vaccines in the state of New Hampshire.
It's your first mistake.
Yes. They reported her to Keene, to the city of Keene, saying that I had a dog. And I then asked, some friends about this. I was like, well, yeah, take her to Vermont, and that won't happen. So I started doing that. But it wasn't until I attempted to put her in the system that the system was like, oh, no, you have to give us money now. Wait, why the hell do I? And the point of this fee, they say, is to prove that your dog is vaccinated. The vet has already done that. So what is this pet registration fee nonsense again?
It's a racket. It's just like car registration and kid registration. It's all a racket. Yep. Give us $30 so we can make your child a ward of the state and we can use them as tax cattle. I also just really quickly want to talk about how easy it is to get a passport without birth certificate, because most people, I guess, I don't know, I haven't surveyed every person in the world, but a lot of people I talk to are shocked when they find out that you can get a passport without a birth certificate. And if you look at the actual birth certificate form, so there's two main forms you need. I forget what they are. I think it's yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. One of them is the regular passport application form. So you need to fill out that. And then you need to fill out the birth affidavit form. So and it's not even just for babies, it's for anyone who does not have a birth certificate, or if the birth certificate was filed a year or after the person's birth.
Okay.
So you have to fill out a second form, which is a birth affidavit, and you just put in information, write a statement, someone who is present at the birth. So if it was a free birth, the mom or the dad could even do this. If it was with a midwife, the midwife could do it. Or if your sister was there, if it was at a hospital, like whatever, whoever was there, writes a written statement of all the details they remember about the birth. It gets notarized. And so you need those two, all of the regular passport stuff, like the photo, and then you will need other documentation. So they require a letter from the state. So you'd go to the town hall. I forget exactly what it's called, but basically it's just on their fancy state paper, pay 15 or $30 for it, saying there is no record of this person having a birth certificate in the state of New Hampshire. So they look up the records, comes up with nothing because the person doesn't have a birth certificate, and then they have like an official form printed out and given to you. And so you need that. Some form of early records to prove that this person isn't, like, you're not kidnapping someone's kid or it's illegal or something. So that could be early medical records. If there was a newborn exam, if the child was born in the hospital, there will be something like that. If you went to a pediatrician, if you went to like any sort of naturopath or chiropractor very soon after birth, those would all work. A baptism certificate would work, like any form of early records for the person. And then, I mean, you could have additional, like the more paperwork you bring them, the easier it is to prove that this person is who you say it is, it's your kid, all this stuff. So there are other documents you can either create yourself as the parent, or you can get them online. VedaRevival.com is an excellent source for what I'm talking about. VedaRevival.com. People can also
spell that? Because I'm not familiar with the word Veda.
VEDA.
Okay.
It's a name.
So
and
that's
then
VEDA Revival.com, and that's where people can go to learn more?
Yes. And you can also, I mean, if anybody really wants to know more about this stuff, they can either schedule a connection call with me or just email me. Nikki at bornfreefamily.com, and my website is bornfreefamily.com, and I have a lot of the information there. All of this is also in my birth prep course. So
excellent. Sound like great tools for people to find out more information and more reasons that they should consider doing this. It's easy to see how people could come to believe that a birth certificate was required to get a passport.
Yeah. But only a few generations of people have had these things. Like, it is a very new thing.
It is. And I think about the state of Mississippi, where everyone believed you had to have your insurance card with you as you drove. And that's not actually true. You had to have proof of that you could handle your financial liability as a driver. And the easiest way of doing that was to have insurance and to have your insurance card with you. But if you were also a multimillionaire, you could just have proof of your wealth with you, and that would meet the criteria of that law as well.
I thought you were going to say like a wad of cash.
I would recommend against carrying wads of cash, because if you get pulled over, the police can say, "Give me that wad of cash. We're taking that."
And they do that.
Yes, it's called civil asset forfeiture, and then you can spend another wad of cash getting back your initial wad of cash. So without getting into all of that, so that's bornfreefamily.com.
For another episode.
Yes. And VedaRevival.com. But you can email Nikki at bornfreefamily.com and go to bornfreefamily.com to learn more. If you're considering starting a family, which, like, let's be real, most people are considering that or doing that or have done that, bornfreefamily.com is where you should go. And thank you for listening. Check out our Patreon. I forgot to mention that earlier. Patreon.com/LRNFM if you'd like to do that. And definitely look us up on YouTube. Search for Free Talk Cast. That's the best way to find it at this point, because the actual name of the channel isn't taking you there. We're working on all of that. So like, share, subscribe, all of that great crap, because we're still working on making this basically brand new YouTube channel. into something that actually has people watching it and that will show up in people's search results. So thank you for listening and have a great week.